Hi, welcome to, I don't know what episode this is, of Don't Make Me Pull Out My Books. I had a request from somebody who I've already forgotten the name of. I'm really sorry I don't have it up on the screen or on my notes. Anyway, they requested that I talk about the concept of Holmes and kindness, and specifically address the whole concept of Holmes is, cold, emotionless, distant, a jackass. And I had that on my list of things to address at some point, but it's much later on because that's going to take a bit of time. And I'm hoping I've condensed it enough today to make it less agonizing. But there is definitely one of the attacks in elementary is that this Holmes is too nice, really, which is hysterical. And I did want to address that because Sherlock Holmes has become, in the general miasma of thought, that in the great cultural osmosis, we've come to understand Sherlock Holmes as a jerk, somebody who's brilliant but rude and impossible to deal with and never very nice. And that's not really who Holmes ever was, and I don't know where this concept really came from because it's not really present in a lot of adaptations. You look at the Basil Rathbone films, and he's a suave gentleman, and isn't rude at all ever. You look at the Granada series, and Holmes is occasionally erratic and strange, but he's never cruel. And you look at the Russian Holmes series, and again, occasionally erratic and strange, but never mean. But lately it seems like people seem to associate Sherlock Holmes with genius tied to cruelty, and that's just so wrong. And it's really unfortunate that we've come to that, because Holmes was actually an incredibly compassionate gentleman, and we've lost that somehow. So today I'm going to be looking at the compassion that Holmes shows to various people throughout the stories. And I wanted to first of all begin with Holmes and his treatment of abused or wronged women. Because we've seen in elementary, Holmes reacts very, very poorly to a couple of things. First is the abuse of the mentally ill, which we see in the pilot, most obviously. We also see his reaction to Katya, the woman who is locked in a man's basement and used as a sex slave. We see his reaction to kidnapped children and children who've been abused. But there's not a lot of parallels necessarily there, but he does have quite the reaction to abused women within the story. So that's where we're going to begin today. So we're actually going to open with, where are we? Speckled, is that where I want to begin? Yes. Speckled Band. So in the Speckled Band, a woman comes in, she's a potential client for Holmes. And here's just a little bit of a passage of something that happens. For answer, Holmes pushed back the frill of black lace which fringed the hand that lay upon our visitor's knee. 5 little vivid spots, the marks of 4 fingers and a thumb, were printed upon the white wrist. You have been cruelly used, said Holmes. The lady colored deeply and covered over her injured wrist. He is a hard man, she said, and perhaps he hardly knows his own strength. So Holmes notices that this woman is being harmed by, in this case, her stepfather. And he points it out, and he's not okay with it. And it should be noted that in the Speckled Band, the guy, oh, spoiler alert for a story that, is over 100 years old. In the Speckled Band, the guy who's abusing the woman dies, and they don't really feel all that bad about it. And earlier in the story, he goes, "You must not fear," he said soothingly, bending forward and patting her forearm. "We shall soon set matters right. I have no doubt. You have come in by train this morning, I see." So, he takes a moment to sit down with her and chat with her, and he points out that she's being abused, and he proceeds to take her case. He's not really cool with abuse. In a later story, we have here the Abbey Grange, at which point He goes to a house to see about a man who died, got his head smashed in, and he wants to find out what's going on. He talks to the wife of the man who died to see, what her account was. He wants to hear her take because she was present at the time. And this is what happens. She shuddered and buried her face in her hands. As she did so, the loose gown fell back from her forearms. Holmes uttered an exclamation. "You have other injuries, madam. What is this?" 2 vivid red spots stood out on one of the white round limbs. She hastily covered it. It comes out later that her husband was stabbing her with hat pins. Again, this is a story where Holmes lets the potential murderer, he didn't technically murder him, he lets the guy go free. And later on in the story he says, "No," Holmes answered in his gentlest voice. "I will not cause you any unnecessary trouble, Lady Brackenstall, and my whole desire is to make things easy for you, for I am convinced that you are a much-tried woman. If you will treat me as a friend and trust me, you may find that I will justify your trust." He lets a guy go free, not only because he didn't technically do anything, he could still be tried though, but because dude who died was a jackass who abused his wife, and Holmes really can't find it in him to pursue the murderer because he doesn't deserve it, basically, is what Holmes says later on in the story. I mean, he holds like a mini trial in his house for Captain Crocker, who's the guy who sort of not really killed the husband, and Watson and him are like, "Go free! You just go. You're good." So, yeah, Holmes and abused women. Again, not a pleasant mixture. What do I have? Oh, Case of Identity. So in Case of Identity, weird story. At least in my view. This woman comes in, she's like, "Hey, I had this guy, we were engaged. My dad's not really down with me getting married, but, he's never, it's cool. He's cool with me getting married to him. But my fiance came to my wedding, and he just disappeared. We're not married. Where'd my fiance go?" And Holmes says, "It seems to me you have been very shamefully treated," said Holmes. So he's like, okay, well, that's not cool. Well, then it turns out that the guy that she was going to marry was her stepfather in disguise. And when Holmes calls in the stepfather and is like, "So, ew, first of all. Second of all, jerk," he then proceeds to be like, "Well, technically the law can't really touch you. Let me get my horsewhip because I can." Holmes is defending this woman because she has been, what does he say? Very shamefully treated. He's not down with women who've been wronged and hurt by the men in their lives. And then I have one more instance here. Ugh. What is this story? This story is the problem of Torbridge, however you pronounce that. So in this instance, he's talking to Mr. Gibson, who's trying to get him to come onto this case because his wife has been killed and a governess, I think it's the governess, has been accused. And Holmes has been asking, what exactly is the relationship between the governess and Mr. Gibson, who's really pissed at this whole implication, and there's like a whole confrontation beforehand. We begin with Holmes speaking. "I do not blame you for feeling it. I should blame you if you expressed it, since this young lady was in a sense under your protection." "Well, maybe so," said the millionaire, though for a moment the reproof brought the old angry gleam into his eyes. "I'm not pretending to be any better than I am. I guess all my life I've been a man that has reached out his hand for what he wanted, and I never wanted anything more than the love and possession of that woman. I told her so." "Oh, you did you?" Holmes could look very formidable when he was moved. "I said to her that I could marry her. If I could marry her, I would, but that was out of my power. I said that money was no object, and that all I could do to make her happy and comfortable would be done." "Very generous, I am sure," said Holmes with a sneer. "See here, Mr. Holmes, I came to you on a question of evidence, not on a question of morals. I'm not asking for your criticism." "It is only for the young lady's sake that I touch your case at all," said Holmes sternly. "I don't know that anything she is accused of is really worse than what you have yourself admitted. that you have tried to ruin a defenseless girl who was under your roof. Some of you rich men have to be taught that all the world cannot be bribed into condoning your offenses. So Holmes takes on this case only because this woman has, in his view, been wronged by her employer. So, those are just a couple of instances of Holmes having issues with women who are being abused or wronged by the men in their life. Well, let's move on to a different topic, though, which is Holmes being good with his clients. Again, this is one of these things that has popped up in recent years that I have no idea where it came from, and that's that Holmes can be an utter jerk to his clients. Now, see, here's the thing about Holmes. Holmes can be abrupt and strange, and he can ask questions that seem prying. I mean, he can occasionally be sarcastic, especially with clients he really doesn't like, and that's a topic for another day, specifically Holmes's reaction and dealings with rich clients who presume that their wealth will get them whatever they want, as noted in the previous example. But Holmes was actually really good with most of his clients and really took time to make sure that they were okay. So we're gonna start. I have water. Good. Sorry. We're going to take a look at Holmes's interactions with his clients and how he was able to be kind to them. And these are just like minute sketches. I could read lengthy passages to show how he teases out information from his clients rather than, bludgeoning them with a hammer. But these are just little lines that I thought kind of showed how Holmes interacts with people. We're going to begin with the missing three-quarter. Sherlock Holmes was a past master in the art of putting a humble witness at ease, and very soon, in the privacy of Godfrey Staunton's abandoned room, he had extracted all that the porter had to tell. Right there, he had an art of putting people at ease. Not much else that can be said there. Here in, oh hey, yeah, case of identity again. Is that what I want? Oh, yes. Sorry. I'm barely awake. I've been up for several hours already. Case of identity. When their client first walks in. Sherlock Holmes welcomed her with the easy courtesy for which he was remarkable, and having closed the door and bowed her into an armchair, he looked her over in the minute and yet abstracted fashion which was peculiar to him. Easy fashion, welcomed her in. Very kind and gentle. Not, get in here, let's have their story, I'm annoyed. None of that. Just very gentlemanly, which makes sense because he was part of the gentry. Barrel coronet. Guy comes bursting into their rooms and is like freaking out and clearly on the verge of keeling over from how much he's freaking out. Sherlock Holmes pushed him down into the easy chair and, sitting beside him, patted his hand and chatted with him in the easy, soothing tones which he knew so well how to employ. None of this get to the chase, just a lot of, okay, let's take some time, get your breath, it's okay, I'm here to help. Do I have anything? No, okay. Sorry. What do we have here? Solitary cyclist. Now this is an instance where a client comes in and Holmes really doesn't have time to deal with them. He really doesn't want to deal with them. He wants to send this person on their way. And here's what we have on how he reacts to an interruption to his work. My friend, who loved above all things precision and concentration of thought, resented anything which distracted his attention from the matter in hand. And yet, without a harshness which was foreign to his nature, it was impossible to refuse to listen to the story of the young and beautiful woman, tall, graceful, and queenly, who presented herself at Baker Street late in the evening and implored his assistance and advice. And then a little bit later on, with a resigned air and a somewhat weary smile, Holmes begged the beautiful intruder to take a seat and to inform us what it was that was troubling her. So the narrative says, Watson says right there, that without a harshness that was foreign to his nature, he couldn't have gotten rid of this client. A harshness that was foreign to his nature. That is to say, a cruelty that wasn't existent within him. I don't know where this has come from. I don't know where this view of Holmes has come from. It's so strange to me. Okay, in Golden Pince-Nez. This is not particular to a client, but this is particular to... Oh, hello. Sorry, my computer went black for a second. I really need to get a new laptop. This is not a client, but this is the servants and the people in the household. I may have remarked before that Holmes had, when he liked, a peculiarly ingratiating way with women, and that he very readily established terms of confidence with them. In half the time which he had named, he had captured the housekeeper's goodwill, and was chatting with her as if he had known her for years. So he's good with people. He's willing to take time to chat with them if, in order to get the information he later needs. He's not yelling at people demanding information. He's taking some time. What story is this? Red Circle. Again, this is a client that he didn't really want to take on because he was in the middle of something else. Holmes was accessible upon the side of flattery and also, to do him justice, upon the side of kindliness. The two forces made him lay down his gum brush with a sigh of resignation and push back his chair. A little bit later on, Holmes leaned forward and laid his long, thin fingers upon the woman's shoulder. He had an almost hypnotic power of soothing when he wished. A little bit later on, Dying Detective. This is his interactions with Mrs. Hudson. She was fond of him, too, for he had a remarkable gentleness and courtesy in his dealings with women. He disliked and distrusted the sex, but he was always a chivalrous opponent. So, okay, so here Watson is saying he doesn't really like women, but he's pretty damn good with them. Honestly, guys, I don't know where this idea of Holmes as a jackass has come from, because it's not even really supported in the stories. You could probably find like 2 instances where Holmes is like really rude to people who don't deserve it. Three Gables. Oh, this is a great one. Three Gables. Awful story in terms of racism. I mean, just excruciating. If you could skip like the first 3 pages, you're probably going to be able to deal with it a lot better. But there's a great moment in Three Gables in which Holmes is just, you just want to hug him because he's so nice. So he's representing a woman named Mrs. Maberly, who owns like a house. I don't know what she does. Anyway, she's not very well off. She's not rich. And earlier in the story, she says something about how if she had the money, she would go travel. Well, here's a quick he's in the middle of asking questions about something that happened in the house, and suddenly he goes, "By the way, Mrs. Maberly, did you say you wished to travel?" "It has always been my dream, Mr. Holmes." "Where would you like to go? Cairo, Madeira, the Riviera?" "Oh, if I had the money, I would go round the world." "Quite so. Round the world. Well, good morning. I may drop a line in the evening." And then they walk out, and as they're walking out, an inspector makes a sign, basically, that says, "That guy's nuts." Because, I mean, it doesn't make any sense in the interrogation and in the questioning of this poor woman. But then later on, after he's found the villainess and the person who's trying to break into her house, because that's what is happening. Somebody's trying to get her to sell everything in her house to them because they need something in it. Well, he finds the woman who's doing this. And this woman is wealthy beyond measure. And he says, well, said he, "I suppose I shall have to compound a felony as usual. How much does it cost to go round the world in first-class style?" The lady stared in amazement. "Could it be done on £5,000? "Well, I should think so, indeed." "Very good. I think you will sign me a cheque for that, and I will see that it comes to Mrs. Maberly. You owe her a little change of air. Meantime, lady," he wagged a cautionary forefinger, "have a care, have a care! You can't play with edged tools forever without cutting those dainty hands." He takes time to get his client her dream trip. He didn't have to do that. He could have said, "Okay, well, don't do that anymore. Shame on you." And he does do the shame on you, but he gets something for his client. He gets his client her dream. That is not the actions of an emotionless, cruel man. That is a man who goes, "That woman's been really tried and really tested. She deserves something. She deserves whatever she wants." And that's amazing because Holmes did that with no one saying, "Hey, you should do something for her." He does it of his own free will. And isn't that lovely? I'm sorry, I really like that. That's really just a wonderful moment. later on. Oh, Sussex Vampire. Just a random little quick mention. The big rugby three-quarter was trembling all over. Holmes put his hand soothingly upon his arm, taking time to comfort someone. We can skip that one. That one's not really important. The Veiled Lodger, which we're going to have two references to this, but we're only going to take on one for the moment. Veiled Lodger, woman who was tragically, terribly scarred after basically being half-eaten by a lion, tells her story to Holmes, and when she's done. We sat in silence for some time after the unhappy woman had told her story. Then Holmes stretched out his long arm and patted her hand with such a show of sympathy as I had seldom known him to exhibit. Now, I guess that's possibly where this concept of Holmes as a jerk came from, because Watson says, seldom known him to exhibit. And it's like, Watson, have you read your own stories recently? Like, every other story has Holmes reaching out and being like, there, it's going to be okay. So he, maybe this is like extra compassion, I don't know. But, thanks, Watson, for potentially contributing to this weird, strange concept that Holmes is a jerk. But moving on, so those are just a couple. I didn't pull out all the instances of Holmes being good with clients, and like I said, some references to Holmes being good with people, you'd really have to pull out massive paragraphs because it's in the technique rather than in a single pithy line. But these are the single pithy lines that I could pull out without making a 42-minute long video again. But now we're going to go back and look at some more. And look at some unique, strange cases that I didn't feel fit into either the defense of abused women concept or into the compassion for a client concept. So we're going to go back to the missing three-quarter. So in this one, there's a missing three-quarter who's like some sort of rugby, I don't know, some cricket, rugby, something like that. It's a sport I'm not familiar with at all. Anyway, sports guy has disappeared and they need him for a big game. Well, they burst in at the end to find him, and it turns out the reason he disappeared was because his wife or his girlfriend, I don't remember if they were married or not. Basically, the woman that he loved was very ill and dying, and has in fact, by the time they find him, died, and he's just collapsed at her bedside, crying. Holmes was endeavoring to utter a few words of consolation and to explain the alarm which had been caused to his friends by his sudden disappearance when there was a step upon the stairs, and there was the heavy, stern, questioning face of Dr. Armstrong at the door. So Holmes is trying to comfort a guy who just lost his beloved. Not necessary. Wasn't necessary for anything to get more information. He did it because guy just lost the person that he loved, and that sucks. And Holmes recognizes that totally sucks. In this story, which is a story, Boscombe Valley Mystery. Now, what happens in Boscombe Valley Mystery is that guy gets killed, and a lot of shit goes down, and it turns out that the guy who killed him was basically being blackmailed by the victim because of some past indiscretions. Well, Holmes lets the guy go because the guy's dying anyway. And this is just a quick little mini monologue that Holmes has at the end. God help us, said Holmes after a long silence. Why does fate play such tricks with poor, helpless worms? I never hear of such a case as this that I do not think of Baxter's words and say, there, but for the grace of God goes Sherlock Holmes. He feels bad for the guy. He feels bad for all people who are pushed into crime like that. I mean, it sucks. And Holmes recognizes that. Twisted lip? Yeah, twisted lip. They found out that the guy that they arrested on suspicion of murder is actually the guy that they thought was the victim. Through a lot of fun times. Good story, go read it. It was not the wife, it was the children, groaned the prisoner. God help me, I would not have them ashamed of their father. My God, what an exposure, what can I do? Sherlock Holmes sat down beside him on the couch and patted him kindly on the shoulder. And then he proceeds to advise him on how, maybe we can make this all disappear. And thankfully, the Inspector Bradstreet, I think it is like, yeah, just let him go, even though he technically broke the law. because he did technically break the law. Charles Augustus Milverton. One of the opening monologues. This is about Charles Augustus Milverton, who is a terrible, terrible blackmailer, if you're not familiar with the stories. I have said that he is the worst man in London, and I would ask you, how could one compare the ruffian who in hot blood bludgeons his mate with this man, who methodically and at his leisure tortures the soul and wrings the nerves in order to add to his already swollen money bags? I have seldom heard my friend speak with such intensity of feeling. So he's ticked because this guy is blackmailing people and it's hurting people, and it's awful, and he feels compassion for those people. Oh, another monologue towards the end of Cardboard Box where Holmes just basically laments the state of the world. What is the meaning of it, Watson? Said Holmes solemnly as he laid down the paper. What object is served by this circle of misery and violence and fear? It must tend to some end, or else our universe is ruled by chance, which is unthinkable. But what end? There is the great standing perennial problem to which human reason is as far from an answer as ever. General compassion. General feelings of unhappiness that the world is really shitty. And then this is an interesting one. Illustrious client. This guy, this is Baron von Gruber. Clearly defined villain, an awful, awful human being. Like, a lot of the villains in the Holmes stories are people who were really pushed into what they did. You know, poverty drove them to steal things. Fear for their own lives, fear for their family's life pushed them into murdering. You know, we actually have a lot of sympathetic villains within the Holmes stories, which is why Holmes lets so many of them go. But this is a guy who ruins women's lives very much on purpose, is suspected of having killed his first wife, even though no one is able to prove it, and was going to ruin the life of another woman. And we meet Kitty Winters in this story as well, who was never a wife, but a woman who had her entire life ruined by Baron von Gruber's actions. Like, this guy is not redeemable in any way, shape, or form. So at the end, what happens is Kitty Winter hates him so much that she throws acid in his face while they're breaking into his house. And when Watson is there and Watson takes care of him and tries to make him feel better, when he goes back home, he explains to Holmes that this guy basically had his face eaten off by acid. And here's what the book says. Holmes was seated in his familiar chair, looking very pale and exhausted. Apart from his injuries, even his iron nerves had been shocked by the events of the evening, and he listened with horror to my account of the Baron's transformation. He felt sympathy for a guy who didn't deserve any sympathy, because even getting acid thrown in your face is something that you really can't just be like, whatever, no big. And then we have, now I'm going to go back to the Veiled Lodger, because I said I was going to. The Veiled Lodger is kind of interesting because no crime is committed. The entire story is just a story within a story. There's no... this woman calls Holmes in to talk to her just because she needs to tell the full story of what happened before she dies. Now, she makes it really ambiguous because she's like, well, I'm going to die. She doesn't really say much about it. She's youngish-ish, though, and even though her face has been eaten by lions, by a lion, not lions, plural, one lion, she's not, that hasn't ruined her health, so it's kind of like ambiguous throughout this entire thing. Well, at the end, we have this. Yes, said the woman, the case is closed. We had risen to go, but there was something in the woman's voice which arrested Holmes's attention. He turned swiftly upon her. Your life is not your own, he said. Keep your hands off of it. She was going to kill herself, and he told her not to. Later on, we have this. 2 days later, when I called upon my friend, he pointed with some pride to a small blue bottle upon his mantelpiece. I picked it up. There was a red poison label. A pleasant almondy odor rose when I opened it. Prussic acid, said I. Exactly. It came by post. I send you my temptation. I will follow your advice. That was the message. I think, Watson, we can guess the name of the brave woman who sent it. So Holmes prevented a suicide. Holmes tried to convince a woman that, she didn't need to die. She could live. And, there's arguments for, there's arguments against about whether or not his actions were acceptable or okay. But he did it to preserve a life. And I think that's really an ultimate act of compassion. This is a woman he literally just met. He was called in because she wanted, basically, for him to hear her confession before she killed herself. And he convinced her to not do it, which is just very kind of him to do for a stranger. So those are just a few examples of Holmes's compassion and kindness, because it's very much part of the stories. There is definitely an argument to be made that Holmes's pursuit of justice is often out of a sense of compassion, which I didn't even bring all those examples in because I was like, well, we're not going to be here for hours. Let's try and make this a short-ish video. So when in elementary, Holmes does things like get really fucking pissed off because, oh, shouldn't jiggle the table, because a therapist weaponized a mentally ill patient in order to take out his wife, and Holmes blows up at him. That's very much drawn from canon. When Holmes frantically breaks down a door in order to reach a woman who's been shackled and is being used as a sex slave, and he holds her in his arms, that is very much drawn from canon. Holmes cares about people. There's lots of instances where he says, there's lots of instances where Watson conveys that Holmes says things like, I'm a reasoning machine, and where Watson says he was like a machine. But the actual events don't support it. It's very much a difference between show versus tell. We are told a lot of the time that Holmes is cold and distant and a reasoning machine and not very compassionate or kind, that he only cares about the case and in the interest of deducing things rather than actually the clients. But what we see is a very, very different argument. We see Holmes taking time to comfort people. We see Holmes getting upset on behalf of his clients. We see Holmes taking on cases only because the client is so sympathetic, that there's really not a lot of mystery in it, but this client needs help. And I think a lot of times, maybe this is where this concept of Holmes as a jerk comes from, is that what we are told is being prioritized over what we see. And when we approach the Sherlock Holmes stories, we really should do it almost as Sherlock Holmes himself. We should be literary detectives and be looking at the full scope of the stories, the structure, the narration, and also what we see and what we can deduce from that, rather than just blithely taking in what the narrative tells us. Because it does the stories a disservice, and maybe that's where it comes from. It boggles my mind that people think Holmes is a cold jerk, because it doesn't make any sense, guys. It makes no sense. So anyway, sorry. That's just a few notes on Holmes being compassionate. There's a couple of topics with Holmes that I want to address that are really going to come and bring back in the concept of Holmes as a decent person, rather than someone who hates everyone and everything. But that's just your nice brief glance of Holmes and compassion. Again, questions, comments, suggestions can reach. Damn it, I got it wrong this time. Can reach me down there-ish. Theoretically, I'm going to remember to put a link down in the information section that leads to a Dropbox file. The same person who requested this topic, again, I'm so sorry I forgot your name. I'm so sorry. Also requested that I put together the list of quotes that I was drawing from for my topic on Watson, and Watson as a detective and Watson as a sober companion. So I tracked down my old notes and stuck them all into one file. It's not formatted at all because I just copied and pasted from another file. So it's kind of a mess in terms of formatting, but it does give you an idea of what all I was looking at rather than just the few pieces I selected. So thank you for watching. This is not quite as long as the Watson one, thank God. And if you stuck into the end, again, blue ribbon, gold star, you rock. Thanks for watching. We will theoretically be back next week, possibly earlier if I get bored. Peace out.